world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. And on this show, we bring you news from around the world, talk about global affairs, innovation, a post-COVID world as we try to return to normal, a global recession, rising gas prices, inflation, and an increasingly divisive and turbulent world on the heels of one of the most divisive midterm elections in U.S. history. Before I begin my commentary, first, this evening, around 9 p.m. on primetime television, Donald J. Trump, the former president of the United States, is expected to announce his candidacy for the Republican nomination for the presidency of the United States in the 2024 elections. This after almost every candidate Trump endorsed lost, and many Republicans in his own party blaming him for their inability to take over control of the Senate, with still the House yet too close to call, although it's leaning Republican. We're going to talk about that as well in the show, of how a president with a 44% approval rating can win his party in the Senate. The first time, only the fourth time in the U.S. history that's happened. Roosevelt, Kennedy, and I can't remember the other president, but amazing that Joe Biden was able to do it. But before we get into the political analysis and commentary, we're going to talk about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. Today is the anniversary of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. This was a $1.3 trillion investment in America's infrastructure to help us be globally competitive. A quick recap of this is that there are over 400,000 schools that don't have safe drinking water, and this act invested $55 billion in making sure that schools can get lead out of the water and have clean drinking water. About $65 billion for broadband. Many of that broadband money is coming to my own state of North Carolina, where they're deploying it in the last mile of rural America so kids can have a good education and people can work remotely. Billions in roads and bridges, over $70 billion in public transit, take cars off the road, reduce our carbon emissions, and help other communities who often have lack of access to transit, make it better for them. $17 billion for airports, another couple billion for waterways and water infrastructure and ports, $66 billion for rail to catch up with the 22,000 miles of rail that China has already built. And let's not forget the electric vehicles, which Biden's aggressive goal of 500,000 charging stations. But the bottom line is incentives and credits so that manufacturers can produce more electric vehicles and make it easier and more affordable for the American people to buy them. And then also billions of dollars investment, about $66 billion in the power grid. This was the largest investment in infrastructure in the United States since Franklin D. Roosevelt sat in the White House running the America during the Great Depression. Now, the key I think we should talk about today and on future shows is the execution. Let's not forget that when Roosevelt was in the White House, within 4 years, he was able to modernize 1,000 airports, put electricity through every rural city through the Rural Electrification Act. And he was able to do it with Harold Ickes at his side, who ran the Works Process Administration, which employed over 1 million people. The infrastructure worked, and at the time, America spent about 3% of its GDP on research and development, and much more on our infrastructure. Today, as we look around and drive around America and many of our big cities, we see the infrastructure crumbling. The question now is, on the heels of this midterm election, will we begin to see the effects of this infrastructure? My final thought is Governor Roy Cooper, our governor of North Carolina, was on CNN the night before the election. The governor said that he believed that many of the investments in states and cities would start showing economic recovery in the United States. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk about some of those cities. I didn't have time to get prepared today, of the kinds of monies that are coming into North Carolina and other states and how those monies are being used and whether we're going to see those results within the next 6 months to a year. That's the president's challenge. How quickly can he show us now that this investment will pay off for our economy to create new jobs and help our global competitiveness, all at the same time while we're dealing with trillions and trillions of dollars of debt, a war in Ukraine, rising gas prices, inflation. It's going to be an interesting time. Let's get started. Today we have with us Mark Lee, the Wizard of Oz, my co-producer of this show. We have with us Shaquille Latimer from Down Under, the fiery one, who we love his perspective. Not the conservative voice, but a voice, a very loud voice sometimes, and a friend. Chris Greco, our foreign policy analyst. Welcome, Chris. Dan Worthington, the conservative analyst on our show, who brings a different perspective. And then I don't know who else we have, but let's get started.
So I hear, Steve, that you had a couple of jabs while I was away on holidays.
No,
come at me.
Not a couple. We had a tsunami of jabs while you were away.
Let me begin with this. Let's spend a few minutes talking about the election, and then I want to go into the infrastructure act.
Well, but first,
it was a big.
I haven't heard so much BS in my life in your opening statement.
Hammer, baby.
All one-sided, so left-leaning. It was just absolutely incredible, Steve. It's great to have someone who's objective. On the opening statement, reading off the New York Times and all that, blasting all this blather.
I wasn't reading off the New York Times. I was just stating the investments. And Dan, this is a healthy debate to see, is it too much money and will we see the results? And that was the point of my commentary.
Oh, it was mostly pork, buddy.
It's yet to be determined. But let's talk. Let's get to the red. What was supposed to be a red tsunami became a red wave. Then it became a red puddle. Then the red puddle, red trickle, and then it became a red raindrop. So with that being said, what happened, guys? I mean, I'm going to start with Dan Worthington. Dan, you're dealing with 8.1% inflation. You're dealing with rising gas prices. You're dealing with a president with a 44% approval rating, and your party could not win control of the U.S. Senate.
Well, now, first of all, it's not my party. I'm an independent.
Well,
and a constitutionalist.
You're a Republican.
No, I'm not actually. I'm a constitutionalist and an independent. But let's get to the meat of what I think happened. I think the Democrats are better at playing the ground game. They are better at getting the ballot boxes full of votes, that kind of thing. They're well practiced from 2020, and so. What did we expect to see other than a lot of mail-in votes and the situation that nothing's changed from 2020. The same gimmicks and games are played. And so, I'm not going to say anything about the integrity of the vote because I don't know. I don't have anything to base it on. But I do know that this administration has done everything they can to possibly buy votes before this election, to try to prostrate themselves and whore themselves out in every way possible to get votes. It's been almost embarrassing to the extent that this administration has gone to try to influence votes, and the fact that Rain Man beat Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, I mean, it is no surprise because of the kind of people who vote in Pennsylvania. I mean,
I think he could go for the next. I think he should probably be a Democrat.
Let's ask one more question, and then we're going to go to the other panelists. So now that the election is over, Donald Trump's announcing tonight. What is the strategy? Do you think Trump hurt the party and that they ought to nominate someone else? And what's the strategy now to come back so they can win the White House?
I think Trump is tone deaf. I think that he's overplayed his hand. I think he's not being realistic or even reasonable about how he's approaching this. He's clearly not a politician. He's not approaching this at all rationally. It looks like that DeSantis does have more opinion behind him now as the presidential candidate. He's got more support now, at least according to the polls. Don't know how long that's going to last. Now, Trump's pretty good at beating around the support and that kind of thing from folks, getting big rallies. Biden's not so good at that. People hardly ever come to his. So Trump, the message and policies that Trump proposed and supported were pretty good. He's just the wrong guy to be, especially now with the divisiveness and all his legal woes. I think he needs to stay in Mar-a-Lago and build low-income housing homes for the less fortunate or something more purposeful than than trying to continue to divide the country. I think DeSantis is the better choice because he's smarter, more politically savvy, has the same political values and policies, which were good for America. I don't think anyone disagrees that Trump's policies were not good for America. They were working. It's just that he's politically deaf and a rude person. And so I think that is come back to bite him. All the rhetoric on the left about election deniers and all that other stuff, trying to demonize, that's just window dressing and rhetoric and frankly, political sickness to me. We need to be able to pull the nation back in a united way. Biden's incapable of doing it because he's still out to slay Trump and demonize the right any way he possibly can. And there, as you say that there wasn't a red wave, there also wasn't a blue wave.
No,
it was very, very close. We were very, very divided as a country still.
It was a blue mirage, I think. Let's start with
there was. And so, they picked up one Senate with Rain Man in Pennsylvania, one seat in the Senate with Rain Man in Pennsylvania. We're yet to see what happens in Georgia. Clearly, they're going to control the Senate. Unlikely to, it looks like the Republicans are only one seat away from controlling the House. Yeah. So, I think we're gonna be in for some gridlock, which is kind of a good thing, keeps everybody honest. And I just don't know, with the same leaders in place, whether we're going to see a lot of change in the direction of our country towards healing and solving our real problems. That's the thing that I'm concerned about. And so all the rhetoric and stuff that you said at the first of the program, most of that infrastructure stuff was mostly BS. It's going to go in the pockets of the friends of the Democrats and other people who work in government contracting. All that's the way it always works. Yeah, Obama fed his friends that were in solar and other companies that came in and took a lot of money and went bust. We are seeing more progress in the electrical cars and other things. But as we said a number of times, this technology is way ahead of itself and probably not the most environmentally friendly, when there are other alternatives like hydrogen that would really be cleaner and less harmful to the climate downstream.
Now, let's go to Shaquille Latimer. And tomorrow's show, I'm going to actually, take Dan's challenge that, is this all money that's just going out to government contractors? But are there specific examples of, actual investments that are being made in states? So I'll come prepared to talk about maybe a few examples, even in North Carolina, that I can talk about. But that's a good point. These numbers are rather big. And I got to be honest with you, I'm even having a hard time kind of understanding where it's all going. And it's almost too much money coming from the faucet all at once. And I think a lot of people are having a hard time navigating through the system. But let's go to Shaquille Latimer first. Just guys, try to make your statements about 2 minutes each so we can give everyone a chance. So
before we go to me, Chris Greco was waving, so perhaps
Chris, please, everyone, 2.5 minutes so we can go on issue to issue, please.
So
don't cry on us. Sorry about that, man. Your name and went silent.
Sorry about that. So you talk about the red wave. So the red trickle, red, which actually was kind of funny. I really give you credit for that, Steve. That was good. But North Carolina won big time, Steve. Yeah, they got a super majority in the Senate, which means they can do the same thing.
And they won the Supreme Court.
That's right. That's right. So basically,
what's happening in North Carolina?
So basically, North Carolina, I'm going to tell you why it keeps happening is because you got individuals that think that in North Carolina, they come from New York and they come from California and they come from, all the other blue states, and they want to make this state purple. And let me tell you something. It's barely purple now. I came because I was sick and tired of being in Maryland where my vote didn't count for jack. I mean, Democrats took everything. They had super majorities in both areas. The governor was basically titular in nature. He had no power whatsoever. He could veto a law, and they would just override that veto like that. I wanted to come to a place where my vote counted, and North Carolina was that place. So I'm very happy with the situation. And guess what? Guess how many judges they're gonna put through in North Carolina, and they're just gonna shove that stuff through, just like they're gonna do at the federal level now that the Democrats have control that. And I think it's hilarious, Steve, that they are trying to get Kagan or Sotomayor to retire so they can put in a progressive judge, just like Ketanji Brown Jackson. So this is what they're doing. And you know something? I can't blame them for doing that. I mean, we did it as Republicans. We did it. So I think, let's go with strength.
Let me chime in, and I'm going to just do a quick little real quick, and then we're going to come back to you, Chris. But you brought up a wonderful point. And folks, on this show, what I'm doing is I'm trying to get everyone a chance. But real quickly, what they're saying in North Carolina is that the Democrats have gotten complacent. There was an article in the Raleigh News Observer that all the Democrats keep saying that, the urban areas are more Democrat. And so if we just keep waiting, eventually we're going to get them by numbers. But while they're being complacent, the Republicans have really been investing in ground game and in Supreme Court races and judicial races. So they won all 4 races on the Court of Appeals. They won both races in the Supreme Court. A lawyer who had never been a judge beat Sam Ervin, who was a 2-time Supreme Court justice and grandson of the late former United States Senator Sam Ervin, who actually prosecuted Richard Nixon and served the papers on him for Watergate. But the bottom line is complacency. And I got to give Ted Budd credit for running a good campaign. He ran on the economy, inflation, and gas prices. Never once mentioned his connection to Trump, except in his victory speech. And he stayed on message. And I think Beasley was, in my opinion, kind of all over the place. And she didn't have the ground game, and she didn't get the help because they were so busy helping Rain Man and Herschel Walker. But let's go back. Let's go back to Sasha Starr, and then Mark Lee, and then we got to go to Lee as well. So please, Sasha, what is your insight?
I haven't even responded to you.
Shaquille Latimer, please. Sorry.
Go to Sasha first. You've got him on the screen. Sasha.
Okay, sorry. Sasha and then Shaquille. I'm so sorry.
Shaquille, you go first.
Thank you, Shaquille.
Shaquille, go. The floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, so look, I was actually expecting a much stronger Republican victory, shall we say, which didn't eventuate. And the reason why I thought that was because a number of the races were going to be very, very tight, and they were. I wasn't expecting Democrats to win them all. Obviously, the Fetterman one is the one that surprises me the most. And it doesn't surprise me just because he won, because there was some argument made by Republicans that Pennsylvania really needs to look at how they're conducting elections because so many votes were cast before the debate had happened. But we also saw big numbers come in from people that voted after that debate, and so he won. He won that pretty fair and square. Now we can go back and do postmortems about, was Dr. Oz considered to be from New Jersey and all that sort of stuff. At the end of the day, Fetterman won that campaign. I think what's really interesting though is when we talk about the Senate. So we didn't talk about this very much in our shows prior to the election, but it's very important to just note a couple of things. So there were 34 Senate seats from memory. There was 34 Senate seats up, and Republicans were actually defending 20 of them. That's already a tall order. They had to then try to win some of the other 14 the Democrats were holding. In 2024, that's going to be a different situation. In 2024, there's going to be 33 Senate seats up, and I think it's 23 or 24 of those are going to be Democrats that are defending those seats. So I think that the Republicans are probably going to have a much easier time at least winning the Senate in 2024. As for the announcement of Trump, we actually don't know that he's going to make an announcement that he's running for president or not running for president. He might be announcing that he's going to open a new casino or he's going to open a new sports book or something, with the liberalization of those laws. We're just speculating what he's going to do. Maybe he's going to build a Trump tower across the southern border, that spans the whole border to keep it.
Maybe he'll start. Maybe he'll start a TV show about the people who are going to work on his campaign and make it like celebrity campaign, like Apprentice.
Celebrity, yeah, right, exactly. And have a competition for vice president.
Maybe you're right.
As it stands at the
That'd
moment,
be
we don't know
funny.
exactly what his announcement's going to be. So I will just say, though, I actually personally like Ron DeSantis. I think that he's a good politician, and I think that he's done a very good job of talking to the people of Florida. However, one of the problems that we invariably see is that politicians will – whoever's got their phone ringing, can you mute yourself? One of the things that we invariably see is that politicians that are from one particular area end up trying to run the country as if they're from that area. So Gavin Newsom, if he tries to run, which there's a lot of talk of him being one of the front runners for the Democrats, he's going to run the campaign much like he runs California, and that's not going to really go across the country and have that wide appeal. And I think that would be the same really with Ron DeSantis. If Ron DeSantis tries to roll out what's been popular in Florida, that's not going to fly in Illinois. It's not going to fly in, most of the coastal areas of the United States. And so I think you need to be very careful about who you're looking for. And the fact still remains that CPAC did not endorse him over Trump. And the numbers are still showing that there's more Republican support for Trump than there is for Ron DeSantis. So I'm not necessarily sure that's a great idea. The last couple of things I'll just touch on. I take it, Steve, that given your statements a couple of weeks ago about democracy, will be under attack in North Carolina, and heaven help North Carolina if the Republicans get a supermajority. Are you planning on moving from North Carolina now that they have a supermajority, or do you now trust that the Republicans are going to be fine to run that state? But lastly, I just want to talk about this thing about election deniers. And this is the language that's used, like you've got an infrastructure bill, but when you keep repeating something over and over, people start to associate things with things. So it's the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And they always have to say, Democrats always have to say bipartisan, 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 to imply that this had wide appeal. It didn't. There were no Republicans really that voted for this. What they wanted was a much more reduced Build Back Better bill. And there was a lot of things in it that people didn't like and still don't like. You mentioned something about water in the schools. Who's going to argue against that? Of course, people in your country and in mine are going to want children to have access to clean drinking water. If that's not happening, that's a disgrace. But the question is, why are the states not doing that? Why is the federal government having to pop in and pay for something which is a state responsibility? So what that looks like is it looks like a Democrat federal government giving money to Democrat-run states predominantly and saying, well, look, it's for this great purpose. The same reason why they want to increase taxes, okay? Because we've got this great thing that we want to spend the money on, and it's very difficult for people to argue against it. You do the same thing with gun laws. You say, well, Republicans oppose common sense gun laws. Really? Like these laws are common sense to everybody. Republicans just oppose it because they're mad? I mean, come on, that's not how it is. Obviously, there is opposition to it, and people should be debating what the issues are, what the pros and cons are, so you can examine these things and try to come up with a proper sort of answer. So back to the election, so-called election deniers. I come from Australia, so Australia, we have compulsory voting. I think it's really important that everybody who wants to vote should be able to vote. Okay, there's no question about that. I don't actually have a problem with mail-in voting. Your system in America is a little bit different. But what I think is really silly is for one side of politics to pretend that there is not going to be issues with fraud, that there's not going to be some issues with the security and the validity of the vote. That is a reasonable thing for people to question. But yet, when people have tried to question that and states have tried to change their laws, like Georgia, like Florida, they've been criticised and accused of trying to, subvert the vote or suppress the vote. And for places like Arizona, where Maricopa County are still counting, as a week has gone by almost now, and they still don't know what the results are. I mean, that's appalling. I can't understand why anybody in your country would say, hey, this is fantastic. It's appalling. And why on earth did Katie Hobbs not decide to remove herself from that situation? If you're in charge of the elections, you're in charge of how the elections are conducted, and something like this goes wrong, where printing machines and voting machines run out of ink in a strong Republican area, what do you expect is going to happen? Of course, the losing side is going to point to that and say, hey, something's off. And I don't think that just to continually, label them as sort of election deniers and conspiracy crackpots is fair. They've got reasonable concerns and they should be addressed. If you want to have a conversation about ensuring democracy works and ensuring that everybody gets a say and they get a functional government that actually does what the people want, it might help if you start listening to those people, understanding their concerns and developing something better than just name calling and reducing them to these slogans.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. So let's go to Lee and then Sasha, and then maybe get a quick update on Ukraine. Lee first, and then Sasha and Nick also as well. I want to get an update from Ukraine from Sasha. Lee, what are your thoughts?
I did basically reiterate everything that Shaquille said. I don't know why everything else in life we can question, elections we can't. Everything else in life, whether it's your passport or your driver's license, you have to show up in person with documents proving who you are. But for elections, we take it as a joke. For the most part, I'm just at a loss. The double standards or no standards.
Yeah. So real quickly, let's go to Sasha Starr and Nick. I don't know if you have any insight as well.
Oh, of course, I have some insight. I was in Salt Lake City the other day. I was trying to understand the mind of Shaquille Latmer, which is like almost impossible to understand. But in Salt Lake,
Nick, the difference between genius and academia. So you keep reading those books at university.
I was forced to watch Fox News. Okay, purportedly fair and balanced, which I did discover was originated by some guy in Australia. Well, guess what? It wasn't fair and it wasn't balanced. What happened? This guy called Hannity. I don't know if you saw.
Well, they don't advertise
Hannity.
Hannity. You know what he did? You know what he did? He brought in 8 Republicans to talk about their red wave or whatever the heck they were going to win, everything, blah blah blah. And then there was this lady called Laura Ingraham. Okay, and she's purportedly pretty bright. She got a bachelor's in Dartmouth and a law degree at University of Virginia, but she reminded me of Rachel Maddow. Oh, I'm going to tell you how bad the Democrats are, blah, blah. Okay, and that's all these people watch. Okay, so the real problem with Fox News and people that watch it like Shaquille, it is not fair, it is not balanced, it's a one-way ticket, and people should turn it off, which is what we do in our thing. So I had an opportunity to watch a non-fair, non-balanced, and they changed their name now. They're Trusted and Most Watched. Well, they have 2.6 million people that watch them here in the United States. That's not a lot of people. We went up to 178,000 last week. We'll catch Fox News. They're a complete waste of time, effort, energy, and that's all.
So could I just?
That was blather. You know it.
Because it was directed to me.
Just really quickly.
Hang on, Mark. Hang on. Let me just respond to that. So firstly, they don't actually say they're fair or balanced anymore, because when the Great Australian Murdoch decided to give up his Australian citizenship because dual citizenship wasn't allowed and become American, goodness knows why, he decided to be fair and balanced. That's what he was trying to be. But that is no longer what they claim to be. So I think if you're going to criticize Fox News for being biased to the right, which clearly they are, you can't sit there in this kind of dream world that you seem to live in, Nick, and Steve lives in, telling me and others that CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, etc., the Washington Post, New York Times that Mark Lee likes to get his articles from, that they're just centrist papers and centrist news sources that don't have a left-wing progressive spin on them. Okay, you can't have it both ways. So yes, people like me who watch both have a better understanding of your country than people like you.
Well, Shaquille, first off, I don't just read the New York Times. I read some of the papers from other publications, including Fox News and others as well. So I do try to get
the Beast,
from a variety of places. So I do believe in looking at all issues.
All the left-leaning
pieces. But I also look at Fox, and so I look at a variety of things in that space. By the way, Nick, hold on a second. By the way, Nick, I was going to tell you, because I know that we have a rising TikTok star in our midst, and and all of that. I wish she was here because I could definitely tell her this and everything in person. But Kimberly has been having some rising fame and fortune in TikTok. I think she put out a couple of videos that have like 2 or 3 million views and all in that space. And I just learned recently that if you keep having that TikTok success, hold on a second. If you keep having that TikTok success,
you say Kimberly has 3 or 4 million views on TikTok.
2 to 3 million, not
it's up to 3 million. But and if you get up to these kind of views and everything, apparently you can also get invited to hang out with the stars and the celebrities. Because one of the articles I was reading in one of those crazy places, I think it was The Guardian, is that there is an 18-year-old TikTok fashion influencer that got to go to Fashion Week and all of that. So maybe Kim was going to get ready to hang out with Kim Kardashian and all of those people because she's going to get up to those kind of numbers because he was actually impressed with the fact that he got to go to Fashion Week, which is a major fashion industry, because this man, Mr. Zeller, has over 10.7 million followers and is considered one of the many social media influencers who received invitations to the coveted Fashion Week show in the fall, because that is a big event.
I don't think that Kimberly is going to be woke enough. Because
real quickly,
hang on, Steve. Because firstly, she's not Dylan Mulvaney, whatever his name is, her name, whatever pronoun Dylan's using these days, so they get to go to the White House in a dress. And can I just say, America? Look, I love you. Sasha loves America too, just like I do. We are so fond of your country. What happened with Miss America? Can someone please explain this to me? Like, I know beauty standards are in the eye of the beholder. But if this isn't woke and this is legitimate beauty, America, really? Let me bring up a picture, because by looks of these men's faces, I haven't seen this adorable picture of feminine beauty. Sasha, over to you while I try and find it.
Well, you try to find that picture, and then it's off to Sasha. Definitely, I'm going to toss it back to Sasha as well. I did have one other thing that I was going to mention just really quickly. One about North Carolina. I don't mind the red wave, Chris. You'll be glad to know that, because I definitely am in the liberal hotbed of Durham. Is never going to go red. I don't think it'll ever go red, ever. But one of the things I love about my state is that we are the state that gave you both Terry Sanford and Jesse Helms. And I think it will always be that way, because it is a very unique state in the sense that it is kind of purple and it goes various ways depending on what's happening. Because we do have, Chris, and I will agree with you on this, a lot of independent voters that are willing to look at the issues and vote according to the issues, and that gives us a very unique perspective.
That's
it's actually
fair.
one of the things that I like about my state, and I think it's something that me and Chris actually share in common, because like I said, I just find it unique that we had the idea of being a state that offered you, like I said, both Sanford and Mr. Helms. And if those aren't opposite ends of the extreme, I don't know what it is. And one other quick point I was going to make to something that folks said: stop giving people my ideas. And I hate when y'all give people my ideas, because before joining Pod TV, I had said that I wanted the Presidential Apprentice. I thought that it would be a great TV show. I thought it would be a great idea. And I thought that we needed to have this whole apprentice concept, which Trump started and everything, but it'd be a presidential show. I've been shopping this idea around and everything, and y'all are trying to steal the idea. We cannot be having that. So, Nick, we're going to have the Presidential Apprentice on.
Or he could win the presidency, and then he could have a show on how he hires the cabinet, and it'd be like The Apprentice, and all these people apply.
I really want to see.
I like that,
because again, I'm not American, so it's like comedy gold for us. I really want to see Fetterman. Maybe he could be the next VP. Something like that.
Let me give you an example. I like what David Walker. Real quickly, I want to get to Sasha Starr, but two things I want to say politically, and then we're going to go to Sasha to get an update on Ukraine. But the first thing is I like what David Walker and Walker said yesterday on Economics Monday, that this whole idea of no labels, having a unity ticket and getting a ticket that is a Republican and a Democrat, so you have a coalition government, and you'd have another alternative out there than what's going on now, where you have basically extremes of each party. That's going to be interesting. I think maybe it's a good sign of this election.
Sorry, but it's not going to be interesting because it's not going to work.
Lincoln tried Shaquille
candidates through the primaries, right? You're never going to get them through the primaries, and that's the problem. That's why the system is so broken. So it sounds good in theory, but you'll never get there.
Shaquille, didn't Lincoln try that with Andrew Jackson?
Well, we're talking about something that happened, 150 years ago, right? We're not talking about what's happening now.
But
you can't. I think that in modern American history, it would be almost impossible to see that the president on one side of politics and the VP on the other. right? And in the couple of times we have seen that, right? Somehow presidents have been assassinated. So, even at the foundation of America with Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, where there wasn't an assassination as such, but there was some dramas there right at the foundation. So, the idea, Steve, sounds great in theory, but if the idea is that Democrats and Republicans are going to work together,
why can't it work? It's worked on state levels because definitely we've had that here in North Carolina. We've got a Republican lieutenant governor. We've got a Democratic governor.
Local levers,
we've definitely had it in other states as well. I know it hasn't worked all that well in other world governments, but
Shaquille is right.
Why it won't work.
Shaquille hit the nail on the head primary. And then real quickly, before we go to Sasha, the Carrie Lake has lost the governor's race in Arizona. She was defeated by Katie Hobbs, the Secretary of State. And Lake wanted to upend a lot of the voting laws, which would have impact in 2024 elections, but she lost. So that's another example, another Trump-backed candidate. So he didn't do very well on that front. But let's go.
But again, Steve, that's not. Look, you can't blame like the Republicans are trying to do this. So maybe you have been watching Fox. You want to sit there and say, "Oh, this is all Trump's fault." Look, at the end of the day, a lot of what the media is labeling, what you guys seem to think that CNN and all that are sort of fair, reasonable news sources that present things from both sides. People wanted to sit there and say, well, look at these crazy, crazy conspiracy theorists. At the end of the day, there are issues with how elections are conducted in the United States. There is talk about that everywhere. Okay, all across the country, there's talk of that. There is also talk about should you federalize election rules? Should there be changes to or minimum standards that each of the states would have to abide by? Those are all things that you want to talk about. But yet, when a Republican jumps up and says, look, these election rules, maybe we shouldn't have Katie Hobbs, who is my political opponent, also in charge of making sure the elections are fair. Maybe that's a conflict of interest. Maybe they should avoid at least the appearance of impropriety. Maybe we should have debates prior to voting, to voting opening. These are all things that are being discussed. But as soon as a Republican says it, they're election deniers, they want to upend election rules. But any change that Democrats want to make, it's like, you're a racist, homophobe if you oppose it. You can't have it both ways. Either you want to have a conversation about elections or you don't.
Hey, Shaquille, question for y'all. Well, it's actually a question for the entire panel.
Can we go to Sasha? This has been waiting so
patiently. Sasha's been really patient.
Yeah, Sasha's been patient.
Thank you, Mark.
No problem.
Go ahead, Sasha.
Concerning Ukraine, I will have show in about 20 minutes at 11 o'clock. So anybody who is interested to find out what's happening there can attend and watch the show. Concerning election, Shaquille, you forgot to mention what Trump might announce tonight. He may announce the building of a new hotel and condominiums in Toronto and raise another few $1 billion and walk away with this money. That's one thing. How about new Trump University? It's about time to make one.
Sasha,
it's been long
there could be
time
hope for you. Sasha, there could be hope for you. If he comes up to Canada and becomes a Canadian citizen, you could see an election between Trudeau and Trump.
That's not true. He already was involved in one hotel and condominium Trump Tower in Toronto. He's made a few $1 million. Investors lost $1 billion+, went into lawsuits or so on. Usual his modus operandi. What else you're expecting from the crook? So that's been done and more than once.
So Sasha, I wanted to get your opinion. True. Oh, sorry. I wanted to get your opinion on General Milley's comments about, hey, strike while the iron is hot. Make sure let's have some peace in Zelensky, go get peace with Russia. Blinken went and said to Zelensky, hey, you need to calm down and let's do some peace stuff and whatever else. Remember, if I remember right, Sasha, these were the same generals that were saying, hey, we're going to advise you guys on how to battle the Russians. Now, all of a sudden, Milley, who I never thought was a strong general at all in any way, shape, or form, has suddenly decided that, hey, it's time because winter's going to happen. And all you're going to do is, it amazes me. And this is just me talking. It amazes me that the U.S. generals do not understand the Ukrainians. I don't understand the Ukrainians, but let me tell you, after talking with you, I know one thing is that winter is not going to stop the Ukrainian offensive. That, everyone sits there and says, oh, they're just going to kind of sit back and, have fires by their tanks, and that's going to pretty much be it. Let me tell you something. Though that ground is going to be frozen, which means tanks can roll across it. And so all of a sudden now you're going to be able to move tanks even closer to Russian territory. I have this funny feeling that's exactly what they're going to do. And the Russians are going to sit back and they're going to be frozen in their freaking trenches. And it's not going to be a good move. So what do you think about Milley saying, hey, let's have some peace, Ukraine? Why don't you back off a little bit now that you've taken Kherson and all that stuff?
I think it's a purely political talk. They want to help Biden in the G20 meetings to show that the U.S. is peaceful, and they want to arrange some kind of a peace. But what Zelensky just said in his speech and what he's written just recently excludes any peace because there are no territories. See, Russia is fighting old colonial war for territories. So Zelensky refusing to give them not just new territories, what he's just announced. You see, Putin made one grave error. He announced that from now on, there's 4 territories. They're annexed and becoming part of Russia. So now any attack on its territories is becoming an attack on Russia itself. How about Kherson, city of Kherson, which was part of
That's right.
that Russian so-called territory, is now no longer part of the Russian territory. And also Putin in his speech said that all those territories will be part of Russia, believe it or not, forever. Not a week, not a month, but forever. So that alone doesn't make any sense. But
Hey, Sasha, I just had a scary idea. I want to know what you think about this. Well, one, I was getting ready to ask folks what they think people that lost political future is, because definitely Stacey Abrams lost, Oz lost, and definitely Beto O'Rourke lost. And notice I did put 2 Democrats in there and just only 1 Republican. And I did that intentionally, but I was wondering if people think that is going to be the end of their political careers, or now they're going to go for some big national office. But then to Sasha, I was going to ask him, what do we think of this new ticket? What do we think of this new ticket of, since Putin and Trump are good friends, maybe that's the ticket for 2024. We're going to have a Trump Putin ticket in the U.S. Are y'all ready for that?
Where are they going to be elected? In U.S. or in Russia?
Maybe both. Maybe both. They could both have it.
One thing they're
So I do want to say that Jesse Waters off his favorite channel, Fox News, has made one of the most ridiculous crackpot conspiracy theory calls I've heard in a long time. There's been a major cryptocurrency organization that's gone under, and they've gone under with billions of dollars of other people's money. And the 29-year-old who runs the thing, who lives in this polygamous penthouse in the Bahamas or wherever he lives, he was actually the 2nd largest Democrat donor after George Soros. So for some bizarre reason, which I'm not really sure I follow, President Zelensky decided to put Ukrainian money into this crypto. And so Jesse Waters is saying, so what's happened is the American taxpayer has sent money to the Ukraine. The Ukraine's put it into this crypto thing, and the crypto thing has fed the money back to the Democrats. I think Jesse Waters should be hanging out with Michael Moore when it comes to sort of coming up with stupid shit. But yeah, that sort of stuff needs to be knocked off, I think.
Speaking of stupid stuff, because I know that you're not a big fan of this, even though there is a Black caucus and yes, there is a Hispanic caucus. So I do know that there was a lot of people, for whatever reasons, that were excited because apparently 2 young ladies won, and they were the first ones in Oregon to be elected as Hispanic members of Congress. And that being a Republican, Lori Chavez DeRemer, and Democrat Andrea Salinas. So I know that a lot of times you say you care less about that, but that has been reported in the news. Should we even care? Or what are your thoughts about this? Because there has been stories about this.
Why do you say that I'm not a big fan of this sort of stuff? You think I oppose it? I think people like yourself and Jatovi and Solomon would suggest that I oppose these things, right? This is not the case, right? I think that some minority groups need to get together and discuss things that affect them as a group. But there are oftentimes, with government, with anything else, there are oftentimes things that slip through the cracks. And government has a very, very poor ability to say, we initiated a program or initiative to achieve a set outcome, and we're no longer actually reaching that outcome, or we've reached it, we don't need it anymore, or we're not getting there, or we're causing some other issues that we didn't intend. Government doesn't tend to fix it. And what happens is that things don't end up getting acknowledged, right? So yes, it's great to acknowledge that somebody has been the first person to be in a particular role. But what I find unbelievable is it's not just what these rich white liberals, these overeducated, liberals say to me about how I should think and feel. It's when somebody says to me that I should support something with no idea what my history is. To treat me and Steve exactly the same because we both have Indian blood is an insult to either him or to me, because our experiences have been completely different. Now, this seems to just get so totally unacknowledged. And when you try to use the example with affirmative action, that affirmative action does not help everybody of color. You guys want to rip my head off as if I'm somehow not caring enough, or I don't understand America enough. Okay? And it's not fair. It's just not. The Indian community that went to Fiji found themselves essentially stateless because the British took no responsibility for them. Fiji said they weren't citizens and they couldn't go back to India. A lot of them couldn't even trace themselves back to there. So for people in my family who have spent 15 and 20 years, going through the process of naturalization in the United States to become citizens, only to find that because other Indians prior to them, from much wealthier backgrounds than them, possibly from a higher caste than them, have done well at some universities, that they're going to be discriminated against. And you expect me to sit there and say, oh, I absolutely support that without question. Like, I'm going to sit down with my 10, let me finish. I'm going to sit down with my 10 and 11 and 12-year-old nieces and nephews and say, you know what? When you get to 17, 18, 19 and you're trying to go into college, you're going to be discriminated against, but suck it up because Black Lives Matter. And because the Black community, or the people that seem to think that they can speak on behalf of all people of color, think that this is okay. We're a diverse group of people, and we are diverse in ways that is much more important than just our skin color or our shared ethnicity from centuries ago.
No, I would definitely agree with you on that. As part of your narrative, you were saying, I was going like, wait a minute, I think I've heard this story before, because that's actually one of the arguments that many African Americans have as well, because most of the folks that are of African American roots cannot tell you which of the countries from Africa they came from, because that lovely thing called slavery and all of that. So they know that they came from someplace in the African nations, more than likely, or one of the Caribbean. But if you ask them where, they could not tell you where.
But again, you don't criticize those European countries that were once heavily involved in the slave trade. There's no Black community there talking about how they've been treated since slavery ended, and you don't criticize them. You know why? Because there's no Black community there of formerly freed slaves. And why?
No, wait a minute. I cannot agree with you on that, Shaquille. There are complaints that go on in Europe and in France and in a number of other places that have been around race. So I can't agree with what you just said.
Let me finish my response. There's no Black community.
This isn't a show about race, guys.
Just let me finish my response. I wouldn't be finished already. There's no Black community of formerly freed slaves in those countries, because when slavery ended in those countries, they did one of two things. They either sold them to countries where slavery was still legal, or they shipped the slaves back to Africa. But you don't criticize them, but you come down on the United States as if the United States is the worst country ever because it's the last country to have outlawed slavery. It's just not fair.
No, and Shaquille, I'm going to back off of this and actually bring up another topic as well. But I will just say very quickly that I cannot agree that those conversations don't happen in those other countries that were former colonial powers, because there have been conversations in England, there have been conversations in France, there have been conversations in Germany, there have been conversations in a number of other places. But we can get into that in a later show or a special show and all of that. And I can even bring some people on.
You guys should have a special show,
that
really.
And everything in that space. But I was going to bring up a lighter note because actually, we talk about the world population, and apparently today, on November 15th, we're about to hit a milestone, because apparently on today, I don't know how they're going to pick this child or who this child is going to be, but the 8th billionth child is supposed to be born, because the UN has said that the world population will hit 8 billion on today being the 15th, and just 11 years after passing the 7 billion milestone, and they're saying that it could take 15 years for us to get 9 billion, and the UN doesn't expect us to reach 10 billion until 2080. I don't know that any of us will be around at that time. Well, maybe Shaquille will, because Shaquille's useful and all that, and I'm going for 200, so maybe I'll even be around as well, even though I'll be like 118 or something like at that particular age. But they did say that that's when we're going to hit 10 billion. Are we ready for that many people, or is some war going to happen and that'll just get rid of about 4 or 5 of us, and then it won't matter anyway, and we'll start counting back up? But they are saying that we're going to get to 8 billion today.
And so that's fantastic. Let's go to one final issue before we close out today, and that's the climate. There was the climate summit. Now it's the G20 summit. Prime Minister Biden is meeting with Premier Xi. What do you
Prime Minister Biden?
No, I mean President Biden. What do we all think about this whole China thing? I mean, I'm going to try to do some reading and research about Nixon's policy towards China when Kissinger worked with him. Do you all believe, in just 1 minute or less, because we're running out of time, where do we go with China? How do you go about, if you were advising the president and you were in the White House, or what should his advisors be telling him about China? I'll start with you, Shaquille.
Well, I would just simply say, try to strengthen your relations. Stand up for yourself where you think China's doing the wrong thing deliberately or breaking trade rules, but strengthen relationships and compete with them. Okay, don't try to demean their reputation. That's not the word I was looking for. In the international community, what you should be doing is, they're building a Belt and Road initiative. They're spending trillions of dollars on that. The United States and certainly the Five Eyes nations should be doing exactly the same thing. And that should be led primarily by the United States and the United Kingdom, so that we can increase trade routes, so that we can increase immigration between our countries, people holidaying in each other's countries, that sort of thing. But lastly, I'm just going to slightly over my time. The really important thing, the challenge I think that's facing us at the moment is not just the climate change, because some people will say climate is change and we can't stop it, but environmental concerns about how energy is produced, what we do with plastics, etc. That's a really serious issue. Conservative parties all over the world have really dropped the ball on that. When they do come to the party, they should be coming there with different ideas. But one of the concerns that I've got with both the infrastructure bill and just the initiatives around the world, including here in Australia, is one, they need to be economically viable. Two, they need to be things that are going to be better for the environment than the alternatives. And three, and most importantly, you cannot have a solution across the country that's going to work in all circumstances. You have to understand that different parts of the country and different parts of the world are going to find efficiencies in one thing versus another. Electric vehicles in New York City, in California, the big cities of California, etc., may be a very good idea. In Texas and Miami, all those sorts of places may be a good idea. But in rural areas where you've got much further distances, in northern states where you've got much colder temperatures, where you have much heavier loads with farming and agricultural and heavy machinery requirements, you may need to look for something else, such as, for example, hydrogen-powered vehicles. But in some cases, oil may actually be the most environmentally friendly way of doing things. And if you really care about the environment and you want to do something as a world, we need to have proper conversations without name-calling each other and actually try to address these issues. Having electric vehicles across the board isn't going to help. And of course, Republicans are going to say the batteries are produced by China, so China's going to effectively control our energy grid. But I think Republicans and Conservatives need to back off that argument. You're in a world with other countries, you have to trade with them. So work out what you're going to do, not what you don't like about other countries.
That's a great idea. That's a great point. Anyone else chiming in before we'll get a few more minutes before we close out?
I'll make this very quickly. I had the pleasure this weekend for like the second or third time of traveling with a friend of mine. We were actually going to do a show, and I traveled in his electric car. And I can tell you that ride back was very long because we had to make 2 stops at charging stations, and they took, I think the first stop took like 30 or 35 minutes. The other one took like 15 or 20. And like I said, I am the non-driver here among the group, as far as I know, the only non-driver. And I know that if I stop at a car with a friend that is driving, stop at a gas station is fairly quick. Maybe 5-10 minutes, but it's not 30 minutes. So that is one of the things that I'm wondering about. Do you think that we can ever get to the point where the chargers can be faster? And you are right. It was toward this. We were heading towards South Carolina, even though it wasn't in South Carolina.
Chris,
and
while
it was
you've
a
got
long
your screen
distance
up, can you bring up my link?
the charging stations.
Chris, while you've got your screen up, can you bring up the link that I put into the private chat? Because I'd I'd like for somebody to, as we're closing out, to tell me all about this being the best feminine beauty that the United States could find.
Oh, you
While you're
bet.
doing that, Mark, I think they're looking at swapping the batteries out as opposed to charging them. That'll greatly reduce the time.
Oh, so you would just swatch the battery out. So instead of charging it, you would just swatch it out. That could definitely work. And hopefully that's something they're looking at, because I just know that it was a late night trip. So it was definitely not something I was trying to do and get home at 1 o'clock in the morning.
If they're going to do that, it's going to be even quicker than the gasoline to fill up a tank.
Yep, that would be very true. The other thing I was going to ask about China, and Sasha may have some thoughts about this, and I know we're winding down, is there's a lot of Chinese investments in the United States, and I think that both the Republicans and the Democrats agree on that. So if we're going to have these kind of investments,
Are you guys in America, like, are you being serious?
oh, this is the new Miss America or Miss Universe or whatever.
Is that Photoshop?
No, that's real. That's the Miss America.
But look at the
like-
title. It says that she is Miss Greater Deity. It didn't say Miss America,
Yeah,
so it's some
Miss-
sort of
Miss
other
Greater-
sort of pageant
Greater
that's going
Dairy.
on. So apparently it was
Some
like a transgender pageant or some other kind of winner.
No,
pageant.
it was not.
a
No,
beauty
it
pageant.
wasn't. It wasn't a transgender pageant. It was a pageant against other. I won't say other. It was a pageant against biological females that go by she/her pronouns. That this woman has decided to jump into, and
No,
we're
but-
all supposed to sit there and go, "Wow, this is just absolutely so gorgeous. She's so brave." These poor
Shaquille?
girls, they've worked their asses off to get there. I mean, this is ridiculous.
But I'm just saying, but it's
Historically, they had
not a
a bathing suit
traditional
competition.
competition. It was not a traditional competition for what I saw. It was something that Miss America was doing to, and I see what you're saying about it being a woke agenda or whatever, but it was them reaching out to make a pageant for a specific group, because that was
No,
what
it
that looked
wasn't.
like. That
No,
looked-
it wasn't. She was the only transgender person in it.
But it wasn't a Miss America pageant. It said that if you look
It
back
was
at
a-
that
it was-
article,
it was-
it
No, no,
says
no,
that
hold on.
it was a
Let
pageant.
me bring it
for-
back up.
Hold
Hold on. I
You
gotta
want
bring
to
it back
get
up.
technical and Dan.
Well, guys, it's time for closeout. I've got to run to another meeting. So 2 minutes, 1 minute, Mark. I got to close out.
Yep, get ready to take you, everybody else off, and you can definitely get ready to do the closeout, and we'll figure out what that was now.
Mark,
Bye,
we're being
everybody.
silly now.
Well, thanks, folks, for attending today. I want to close out with just prayers for University of Virginia. Just 2 days ago, 3 students were killed. Christopher Darnell Jones has been apprehended and will be charged with murder of Devon Chander, Lavelle Davis, and Deshaun Perry, a football player for the Cavaliers. We pray for Virginia and for this continued gun deaths and gun violence in America. And perhaps, maybe, we can work together to figure out what is the solution for this, whether it's a combination of gun control or addressing mental health, and what's causing this kind of senseless hate in America today. Of homicides taking place on a much more frequent basis, gun homicides. But that's a conversation for another time. From our family to yours, we wish you all the best, and may the light and love of our hearts always lift us out of the darkness. We'll be back tomorrow. I may be here tomorrow. I may be out, but if not, Mark Lee will be running the show. And but we'll see you tomorrow on Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. Thank you.